Imagine being born into a world where your very existence is seen as a reminder of someone else's mistake, a world where your birth is met not with joy, but with resentment and disdain. This was the world of Ishmael, the forgotten son of Abraham, a child whose life story is marred by rejection, exile, and unfulfilled promises. Today, we dive deep into the untold story of Ishmael, a figure overshadowed by his half-brother Isaac, yet whose legacy has rippled through centuries and shaped the future of nations. The birth of a second child often changes the dynamics of a family irrevocably. It's a shift that cannot be ignored. The firstborn, once the center of attention, now finds themselves relegated to the shadows. The arrival of the secondborn usually garners a significant amount of attention, leaving the firstborn feeling forgotten, neglected, or even invisible. We can all understand how this might feel: the loss of significance, the feelings of inadequacy, the struggle for identity. But no one knew this feeling more profoundly than Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, a man destined for greatness, yet overshadowed by the birth of his half-brother Isaac, a birth surrounded by schemes and strife. Ishmael's birth was anything but typical. His very existence was a result of a desperate attempt to fulfill a divine promise that had not yet come to fruition. Sarah, Abraham's wife, had long been barren, unable to bear him a child. The years passed, and Sarah, growing older and more impatient, felt as though God had forsaken her. In her frustration, she concocted a plan to hasten fulfillment of God's promise. Sarah, unable to bear a child herself, offered her servant Hagar to Abraham, allowing him to have a child with her. This was not an unusual practice in ancient times, where surrogacy and concubinage were common, but was a decision that would haunt Sarah and Ishmael forever. When Hagar became pregnant with Ishmael, Sarah's jealousy and resentment grew. She had allowed this union to happen, but the reality of it was far more painful than she had anticipated. The woman who was meant to be a servant was now carrying a child that Sarah had longed for. The tension between Sarah and Hagar grew, and Sarah's mistreatment of Hagar escalated. The situation became unbearable for Hagar, who fled into the wilderness, pregnant and alone. However, in the desert, God sent an angel to comfort her and reaffirm his promise that Ishmael, the child she carried, would also be the father of a great nation. God did not abandon Hagar or her child, despite the circumstances of Ishmael's conception. But the story does not end here. When Isaac was eventually born to Sarah, she saw her own son as the rightful heir, the one who would inherit everything Abraham had. In her eyes, Ishmael, the son born of her own plan, was a reminder of her impatience and the mistakes she had made. The resentment Sarah felt toward Ishmael deepened, and she demanded that Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael from their home. The pain of rejection that Ishmael must have felt in that moment is almost unimaginable. His very existence, from birth to banishment, had been tied to the whims and mistakes of others. Yet, in the face of this cruelty, Ishmael's destiny was far from over. Even as he was cast aside, God's promises were still upon him, and his story would be far greater than anyone could have imagined. A story of rejection and divine intervention. There is a powerful lesson in Ishmael's life, one that many of us can relate to. How often do we feel cast aside or overlooked by those around us, especially by the very people who should love and support us? How often do we, like Ishmael, find ourselves stuck in situations not of our own making, cast into the desert of life, abandoned by the very ones who were supposed to care for us? But here's the twist. Even when we feel abandoned, even when life seems to have dealt us a bad hand, there is always hope. Just as Ishmael was not forsaken by God, we too are not forgotten. His life story teaches us that even in our lowest moments, God sees us. He hears our cries. He has a plan for us, even when it feels as though we are being cast aside. Ishmael's life is not just one of rejection. It is also a story of hope. When he was cast out, God sent an angel to Hagar, telling her that her son would become the father of many nations. Even though Ishmael was born out of mistake, his future was filled with purpose. This is a critical point. It doesn't matter how we come into the world or the mistakes others may have made in our lives. What matters is that God has a purpose for us, and He will use us to accomplish His will, regardless of our circumstances. As we continue Ishmael's story, we see that God's promises are not limited by human judgment. Ishmael may have been rejected by his mother Sarah, but he was never abandoned by God. In fact, Ishmael's descendants would go on to become a great nation, and he would be remembered as a patriarch in the Bible and a key figure in the founding of Islam. Personal reflection: the power of God's unseen plan. We often find ourselves in situations where we feel as though we've been forgotten or sidelined. Perhaps it's in our careers, in relationships, or in our spiritual journeys. Like Ishmael, we may wonder if our efforts or our worth are being overlooked. But the truth is, God's plan for us is always unfolding, even when we cannot see it. The Bible teaches us that God's timing is perfect, and His purposes are higher than our understanding. In Ishmael's story, we see that even rejection can lead to greater blessings. Sometimes, the paths that seem the hardest and the most painful are the ones that lead to the most profound purpose. Just as Ishmael's banishment led to the founding of a great nation, our struggles can lead to unexpected victories, as long as we trust in God's plan. Ishmael's journey from rejection to redemption is a powerful reminder that no matter how we are perceived by others, we are never forgotten by God. As we continue to follow Ishmael's story, we will see how God's grace and mercy prevail, even in the face of adversity. Stay with us as we explore how Ishmael, the forgotten son, rises from the shadows and neglect to become a key figure in God's unfolding story. The journey into the wilderness. Ishmael's journey takes a sharp turn when he, along with his mother Hagar, is cast out into the wilderness. The moment Abraham reluctantly sends him away is a pivotal one, not just for Ishmael, but for all those who feel abandoned or forsaken by the world. There they were, in the harsh desert, with no provisions, no place to call home, and no assurance of survival. This was a new chapter in Ishmael's life, a chapter filled with uncertainty, yet also one that would reveal God's unwavering presence in the midst of hardship. Imagine for a moment the gravity of this situation. A young boy, barely a teenager, with his mother, walking into an unforgiving desert, the heat of the sun beating down upon them, their water supply running out, and no clear direction ahead. It would have been easy for them to give in to despair. Yet, the most remarkable part of this story is that it was precisely in this moment of desperation that God intervened in the most extraordinary way. As Ishmael and Hagar wandered through the barren wilderness, their hope began to fade. The water in their flask ran dry, and they were on the brink of collapse. Hagar, in her overwhelming distress, placed Ishmael under a bush and distanced herself from him, unable to bear the thought of watching her son die. But in that moment of unbearable grief, God heard the cries of both mother and child. The angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar and called out to her, reassuring her that Ishmael would not perish. In fact, God revealed to her that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. The desert, which once seemed like an inhospitable grave, would become the place where Ishmael's future was secured. The angel showed her a well of water, saving them from certain death. Divine providence in the desert. What strikes me most about this part of Ishmael's story is a profound lesson it teaches us about divine provision. We often find ourselves in situations where all hope seems lost. The bills pile up, the relationships fracture, and the future looks bleak. It is easy to become discouraged and think that we are abandoned. But the story of Ishmael and Hagar reminds us that even in our most desperate moments, God is there watching over us, prepare and provide for us in ways we may not yet understand. It is important to note that the desert is not just a physical place, but a symbol of the hardships we face in life. For Ishmael, the wilderness represented an end, but it also became the birthplace of new possibilities. The place where he was supposed to die became the place where God's promises would come to life. Often, the trials we face, whether it be financial struggle, emotional pain, or personal failure, are the very circumstances through which God's provision and faithfulness shine the brightest. As Ishmael and Hagar stood by the well, their lives were forever changed. The water they drank was not just physical sustenance, but a symbol of the spiritual sustenance that God provides in our most barren seasons. He does not abandon us when we are most in need. Just as he provided for Hagar and Ishmael, he will provide for us the blessings of the desert. Ishmael's time in the wilderness did not end with just survival. It was in the desert that he began to grow into the man God had destined him to be. After receiving the angel's message, Hagar returned to Ishmael with new hope. Their time in the desert was not in vain, for it became the foundation for the legacy that Ishmael would eventually leave behind. God's promise to Hagar and Ishmael was clear. I will make him a great nation, Genesis 21 verse 18. This promise was not just for Ishmael's immediate future, but for the generations that would follow him. Ishmael was not destined to be a footnote in history, forgotten and cast aside. He was a key player in God's larger narrative, one that would span centuries and affect the lives of millions. His descendants, the Ishmaelites, would grow into a great people, and from them, the Arab nations would rise. The lessons here are invaluable. The wilderness, with all its dangers and hardships, can become a place of great transformation. When we find ourselves in difficult times, it is essential to remember that God can use those moments to shape us for greater things. Just as Ishmael's time in the desert led to fulfillment of divine promises, so too can our struggles lead us to unexpected blessings. A father's love, Abraham's role in the story. While Ishmael and Hagar were struggling in the wilderness, it's important to consider the role of Abraham in this story. As a father, Abraham's heart must have been torn. He loved Ishmael deeply, but he was also bound by the decisions made by his wife, Sarah. The pain of sending his firstborn son away must have weighed heavily on him. However, even in the midst of this painful decision, God assured Abraham that Ishmael will be taken care of. Abraham's story is one of great faith, but it is also a story of sacrifice. The decision to send Hagar and Ishmael away was not an easy one, yet it was part of God's plan. Abraham had to trust that God would provide for his son, even though he could not be there to do so himself. This is a powerful reminder that our earthly fathers, for all their love and care, cannot always be there for us in the ways we desire. But our Heavenly Father, like God's provision for Ishmael, will always be there for us no matter the circumstances. The power of legacy. Ishmael's life is not just about his personal survival. It is about legacy. The name Ishmael means God hears. And in the wilderness, God indeed heard the cries of both Hagar and Ishmael. His legacy, though often overshadowed by Isaac's, is significant. Ishmael's descendants would go on to form the Arab nations, and they too have had a profound impact on world history. What does Ishmael's legacy teach us? It teaches us that no matter our beginnings, we have the ability to leave a lasting impact. Even though Ishmael's life was marked by rejection, he was still used by God to fulfill his greater plan. Similarly, we may feel as though we are overlooked or that our efforts go unnoticed, but the reality is that we all have potential to leave a legacy that will echo through the generations. As we reflect on Ishmael's time in the wilderness, we are reminded that God can bring purpose out of the most barren situations. Just as the desert became a place of divine intervention and promise for Ishmael, so too can our own struggles become the foundation for something greater. In those moments when we feel lost and abandoned, God is there, preparing us for a future that we may not yet be able to see. So, when you find yourself walking through your own desert, remember the story of Ishmael. Know that God hears your cries. He sees you, and He has a plan for you that is greater than you can imagine. Ishmael's journey from the wilderness to a future of greatness serves as a profound reminder that God's promises are not dependent on our circumstances. He can take the darkest, most desolate moment of our lives and turn them into a source of transformation and hope. As we continue Ishmael's story, we will see how his legacy unfolds, not only in the immediate future, but in the generations that follow. A vision of a future. The wilderness was not the end for Ishmael and Hagar. It was the beginning of something greater. As we turn the page in Ishmael's life, we begin to see the powerful truth that our circumstances, no matter how bleak, are only a chapter in a larger story that God is writing for us. Ishmael's life was not destined to remain hidden in the shadows of Abraham's legacy. In fact, his future would hold a significant place in God's divine plan. After the momentous encounter in the wilderness, Ishmael's life was marked by the fulfillment of God's promise. While many of us may feel that we are overlooked, forgotten, or unimportant, the truth is that God has a purpose for each one of us. Ishmael's story reminds us that no one is beyond God's grace and plan. Even in times of rejection, even when we feel discarded, God sees us and will provide for us in ways that we could never expect. The promise made to Hagar was not an empty one. God told her that Ishmael would grow into a mighty nation, and this promise would come to fruition as Ishmael's descendants played a pivotal role in shaping history. Ishmael will become the father of the Ishmaelites, a people whose influence would extend far beyond the desert where they first wandered. The role of Abraham, father and friend. In the previous parts of this story, we saw how Abraham reluctantly sent his son Ishmael away. But it is important to understand that Abraham's actions were not born out of lack of love for Ishmael. In fact, he deeply cared for him. Abraham's faith was tested in ways we cannot fully comprehend, and his decision to send Ishmael away was part of God's larger plan. Though Abraham had to make a difficult choice, he did so trusting in God's promise. He knew that God would fulfill his word to Hagar, and that Ishmael's life would not be without meaning. Abraham's relationship with God was central to this trust. It is a reminder for all of us that the choices we make, even the difficult ones, should always be made in faith, trusting that God will take care of the details. The love Abraham had for his son was clear, but sometimes our love for others involves letting them go so that they can fulfill their own purpose. In this way, Abraham was not only Ishmael's father, but also a participant in God's greater plan, a plan that would span generations. The rise of the Ishmaelites. As Ishmael grew older, his life began to take shape. His story is not merely one of survival, but one of influence, growth, and strength. The nation that would come from his descendants would go on to shape the course of history, creating a lasting legacy that endures to this day. The Arab nations, which trace their roots back to Ishmael, have played a significant role in the development of civilization, from the rise of empires to the spread of culture and knowledge. Ishmael's legacy serves as a reminder that God's plans are always bigger than what we see in the moment. Ishmael's descendants would contribute greatly to world history, particularly in the areas of science, philosophy, and religion. The impact of the Ishmaelites is felt across the globe, showing us that no life is ever wasted. Every individual, no matter their beginnings, has the potential to shape the world around them. This part of Ishmael's story teaches us an invaluable lesson. The greatness of a person's life is not determined by their circumstances at birth, but by the choices they make, the faith they hold, and the legacy they leave behind. Even though Ishmael's early life was marked by hardship and rejection, he would go on to create a lineage that would impact the world for centuries. A father's blessing, Abraham's role revisited. Although Abraham was not present to witness the full extent of Ishmael's legacy, the blessings he bestowed upon his son had a profound impact. In Genesis 17, verse 20, God promises Abraham that Ishmael will become the father of 12 princes, and from there, a great nation. Abraham's role as a father was to bless his son, and through his blessing, God would work in ways beyond what Abraham could fully understand. It is significant to note that Abraham did not hold on to his blessing of Ishmael out of fear or selfishness. Instead, he released Ishmael into God's care, trusting that the promise of a great nation would come to pass. Abraham's act of blessing Ishmael is an example of how parents, mentors, and leaders should support those they care about by entrusting them to God's plan. Even when they cannot control the outcome, Abraham's blessing echoes through generations, showing us that the power of Father's words, spoken in faith, can have a far-reaching impact. Ishmael's life proves that blessings spoken over someone's life are not confined to a single moment. They can carry a person through hardships, guide them toward purpose, and create a lasting legacy. The lessons of Ishmael's life. As we reflect on Ishmael's story, we see that his life teaches us many important lessons. The first is that God sees us, even when others do not. Ishmael was cast aside by his family, yet God never abandoned him. His story is a powerful reminder that God's love does not depend on the approval or rejection of others. When the world overlooks us, God sees us and is always at work in our lives. Secondly, Ishmael's life teaches us about resilience. Despite being cast out into the desert, Ishmael survived and thrived. He didn't let his circumstances define him. Instead, he found strength in the promises of God, and that strength led him to fulfill his destiny. In our own lives, we may face challenges that seem insurmountable. Yet, like Ishmael, we are called to rise above them, trusting that God will carry us through. Finally, Ishmael's story challenges us to think about legacy. What kind of legacy are we leaving behind? Are we living lives that will impact future generations? Ishmael may not have known the full extent of the legacy he was creating as he wandered the desert, but we can see now how his life has shaped the world. Our lives, too, are creating a legacy. The choices we make today will echo into the future. The importance of faith in uncertain times. Ishmael's life is not just one of struggle, but one of faith. Even in the midst of uncertainty, he and his mother trusted that God would provide. Ishmael's trust in God did not make the challenges of life easier, but it gave him the strength to endure them. This is an essential lesson for all of us. Life is unpredictable, and it is easy to feel overwhelmed by the trials we face. But when we place our trust in God, we can have the faith to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. As we look at Ishmael's life from the wilderness to fulfillment of God's promise, we see that his story is one of redemption, resilience, and divine faithfulness. His legacy serves as a testament to the power of God's plans, even in the face of rejection and hardship. Ishmael may have been the forgotten son, but his story proves that no one is ever forgotten by God. His life is a beacon of hope for all who feel overlooked, showing us that God sees us, hears us, and has a purpose for us that extends far beyond what we can imagine, a legacy beyond bloodlines. As we reflect on the journey of Ishmael, we come to realize that his story is not merely about his immediate family or his own personal experience. It is a story that reverberates through history, touching millions of lives across the centuries. Ishmael, the son of Abraham, became the father of a great nation, and this truth speaks volumes to us today. The ripples of his life continue to affect the course of humanity. In the previous parts of this series, we've explored how Ishmael's life was marked by struggle and rejection, but also by divine provision and fulfillment. His descendants would go on to shape the world in significant ways. As we move into this part of the story, we'll examine how Ishmael's legacy extends far beyond his immediate family and what lessons we can glean from it. There is no doubt that God's promises are long-lasting, and his purpose for each of us is greater than what we can imagine. The rise of the nations, a world shaped by Ishmael. Ishmael's descendants became the Arab nations, a powerful, diverse, and culturally rich people who played a pivotal role in the development of the world. While many may see the Bible as a book focused on the story of the Israelites, it is important to recognize that God's promises to Abraham encompass more than just one lineage. Ishmael's line, too, carried within a divine plan, one that stretched far into the future. The Arabs have long been associated with their contributions to human civilization, from the fields of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy to the development of complex societies and cities. The descendants of Ishmael made significant advances in the ancient world. The Golden Age of Islam, which flourished in the Middle Ages, is a testament to the lasting influence of Ishmael's lineage. But beyond these tangible contributions, the legacy of Ishmael serves as a reminder that God's plan for each person is unique. Ishmael's role was never to fulfill the same promise as Isaac, but rather fulfill his own promise, to become the father of a mighty nation. His descendants would shape the world differently, offering a different perspective, contributing to a different part of human history. This teaches us that each of us has a role to play in the larger picture of God's kingdom, even if it doesn't look like someone else's journey. The role of conflict in the legacy. While the legacy of Ishmael's descendants is one of great achievement, it has also been marked by conflict. The history of the Arab world, and by extension, the history of Ishmael's people, has been marred by tension and struggle, particularly between the descendant of Isaac, the Israelites, and those of Ishmael. This long-standing tension has its roots in the very story. We are exploring the rivalry between Isaac and Ishmael. This conflict is not merely a historical one, but is deeply spiritual and has shaped religious and political realities for thousands of years. The tension between the children of Isaac and the children of Ishmael has often been seen as a reflection of the broader human condition, the struggle for identity, belonging, and purpose. In many ways, the conflict between these two lines, stemming from the same father, Abraham, underscores the difficulties of human relationships, particularly when it comes to competing for favor, recognition, and destiny. Yet, even in the midst of this tension, we must not lose sight of the fact that Ishmael's legacy is not defined by conflict alone. His story, like the stories of all great figures in history, is multifaceted. Yes, there has been conflict, but there has also been cooperation, coexistence, and reconciliation. Today, the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac often live side by side in the same regions, and though the political and religious divides are still present, there are many instances of peace, dialogue, and shared history. This duality, the coexistence of both conflict and cooperation, offers a powerful lesson for us today. We are all part of a larger story, and sometimes the legacy we inherit may come with both blessings and challenges. How we handle those challenges and the choices we make in the face of them will determine the nature of our own legacy. The spiritual message, God's faithfulness across generations. When we examine Ishmael's legacy, we must not overlook the spiritual dimension of his life. Despite being cast aside by his father and seemingly abandoned by the promises that have been made to Isaac, Ishmael's story is a powerful testament to God's faithfulness. The Bible tells us that God made a promise to Hagar that her son would become the father of a great nation, and that promise was kept. Ishmael's life is a reminder that God does not forget his promises, no matter how long it takes for them to be fulfilled. This is a critical lesson for us, particularly in a world that often feels fast-paced, uncertain, and transient. In a culture that seeks immediate gratification and quick results, Ishmael's story calls us to trust in God's timing. The promises he makes to us may not come to pass as quickly as we hope, and the journey may not be smooth, but we can trust that he is faithful to complete what he has begun in our lives. God's faithfulness to Ishmael also highlights the truth that God's plans are always bigger than our individual desires. While Ishmael may have been cast out of his family, his life was never out of God's sight. God was at work in Ishmael's life, preparing him for a destiny that would have a global impact. This challenges us to look at our own lives through the lens of God's larger plan. We may not always understand why we are where we are or why certain things happen, but we can rest assured that God is at work, orchestrating a bigger story than we can see. Ishmael's relationship with God, a father's love and faith. Throughout Ishmael's life, we also see a tender picture of his relationship with God. Despite the pain of being cast out, Ishmael did not turn away from the Lord. In fact, God's provision in the wilderness shows that Ishmael continued to rely on God. His life teaches us the importance of maintaining faith in God. even when life does not go according to plan. It is easy to trust God when things are going well, but true faith is demonstrated when we trust Him through our trials. This is perhaps the most powerful aspect of Ishmael's legacy. His steadfast trust in the God who saw him in his lowest moments. We can all take a page from his life and apply it to our own. When faced with adversity, we are called not to abandon our faith, but to hold on even tighter, knowing that God is always with us, even in the most desolate places. The story of Ishmael is not just one of survival, but one of divine purpose, fulfillment, and legacy. His life, though marked by hardship and rejection, went on to create a lasting legacy that continues to impact the world today. His descendants, the Arabs, have made immeasurable contributions to human history, and his story reminds us that God's plan for our lives is bigger than any temporary setback or obstacle. Ishmael's life challenges us to consider our own legacy. What will we leave behind? Will we choose to live with faith, to trust in God's promises, and to create a legacy that will impact future generations? Ishmael's story teaches us that even when the world forgets us, God remembers us. His faithfulness endures across generations, and his promises are true for all who trust in him. The power of legacy. As we come to the final part of Ishmael's story, it's crucial to understand the true power of a legacy. Ishmael's life was marked by rejection, exile, and adversity, but it is also a story of profound purpose. The impact of his life is far-reaching, not just in terms of physical descendants, but in the spiritual and moral lessons his story imparts to us. His legacy reminds us that our circumstances, no matter how challenging, are not the defining factor in our lives. Rather, it is how we choose to respond to those challenges that shapes our legacy. Ishmael, through all of his trials, lived with a sense of divine purpose. His faithfulness to God, his ability to rise from the ashes of rejection, and his trust in the promises made to him set the stage for an enduring legacy. The nations that came from him still existing today speak to the lasting power of one man's journey with God. This speaks directly to us. What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? What will our lives say to the generations that follow? This is the question that Ishmael's story forces us to ask ourselves. His life wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having everything handed to him. It was about embracing the divine purpose that God had placed on his life, even in the face of rejection and hardship. And in the end, he became a father to a great nation, a nation that would carry his name across the sands of time. The connection between faith and action. Throughout this journey, one central theme has stood out: the connection between faith and action. Ishmael's faith in God was not passive. It was a faith that resulted in action, whether it was his survival in the wilderness, his reliance on God's provision, or his role as a father of a great nation. Ishmael's life demonstrates that faith is not just about believing in God's promises, but also about taking active steps toward fulfilling those promises. We are called to live out our faith in the same way. It is easy to become disillusioned when life doesn't go as planned, when we face rejection, or when we feel overlooked. But Ishmael's life shows us that God can still work through us, even in the wilderness. Faith without action is dead. True faith requires us to keep moving, to trust that God's purposes for our lives will be fulfilled even when the path is uncertain. This is a call to action for all of us, to live out our faith not just with words, but with deeds. Whether in our families, communities, or the world at large, we are to be active participants in God's story. Like Ishmael, we may not always understand how or why things happen, but we can trust that God's hand is guiding us toward a future that is greater than anything we can imagine. The importance of reconciliation and peace. Another lesson we learn from Ishmael's legacy is the importance of reconciliation and peace. The tension between the descendants of Isaac and Ishmael has been a source of conflict for millennia. Yet, it's vital to remember that God's heart is for peace. In the same way that God extended his promises to both Isaac and Ishmael, he desires peace between their descendants. While the conflict between these two groups continues to be a significant global issue, Ishmael's legacy challenges us to seek reconciliation in our own lives, whether with family members, friends, or communities. The pursuit of peace is a crucial part of our own legacies. Ishmael's life invites us to move beyond division and hatred, to recognize our shared humanity, and to seek understanding rather than conflict. This is not just a political or global challenge. It is a personal one. The divisions in our own hearts, the grudges we hold, the fences we built, all form part of the legacy we are creating. Ishmael's story calls us to tear down these walls, to seek peace and find common ground, just as God sought reconciliation between Isaac and Ishmael. The role of forgiveness. Forgiveness plays a critical role in the formation of a positive legacy. Throughout this journey, Ishmael's life has been shaped by rejection, and yet there is no record of him harboring bitterness or unforgiveness toward his family. Despite being cast out, Ishmael's faith remained strong, and he continued to trust in God's plan for his life. He forgave, or perhaps never allowed resentment to take root in his heart, and this is a vital lesson for us. Forgiveness is not always easy, especially when we've been hurt deeply. But Ishmael's story challenges us to rise above the pain, to release the past, and to forgive. It is only through forgiveness that we can move forward and create a legacy that is not defined by wounds but by healing and restoration. In the face of rejection, hurt, and misunderstanding, Ishmael's response is a beacon for us. He trusted in God's plan. He did not let bitterness define him, and in doing so, he left a legacy of faith, resilience, and divine purpose. We too are called to live out forgiveness as a key element in building our own legacies, both for ourselves and for the generations to come. As we come to the end of Ishmael's story, we are faced with a final call to action. His life, with all its complexity, challenges, and triumphs, serves as a mirror for our own journeys. Like Ishmael, we are all on a path of discovery, purpose, and legacy. Each of us is navigating a world full of distractions, doubts, and obstacles. Yet, we are reminded that God has a purpose for us just as he had a purpose for Ishmael. Now, it is our turn to step forward and embrace our own divine callings. The legacy of Ishmael challenges us to live with intentionality, to live with faith, and take action, even in the face of adversity. We are called to seek reconciliation, forgiveness, and peace, to build legacies that will not only shape our immediate families, but will echo through generations. So, what will your legacy be? Will it be one of faith, action, forgiveness, and peace? Will you trust God's timing, even when the road ahead seems unclear? Will you live out your purpose with courage, knowing that you are part of a larger divine story, just as Ishmael was? The story of Ishmael invites us to embrace the fullness of our potential, no matter where we've come from or what obstacles lie ahead. Now is the time to take action and to begin creating a legacy that will honor God and make an impact for generations to come. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on your life and consider the legacy you are building. Are you living with intention, with faith, and with purpose? Are you ready to trust in God's plan for your life, even when it seems uncertain? If you're ready to take that step to live with the faith and strength that Ishmael displayed, then I invite you to begin today. Seek reconciliation where there has been conflict. Forgive those who have hurt you, and step boldly into the future that God has prepared for you. Remember, your legacy is not just about what you accomplish, but about who you become and how you impact the world around you. Thank you for joining me in exploring the story of Ishmael. May his legacy inspire you to live out your own purpose with courage, faith, and grace. Let's take the lessons of this story to heart and begin creating legacies that will impact not just our own lives, but the lives of those who follow.